Now in this video we're going to do a load test on the battery. We're going to test it to see how many cold cranking amps, or how many cold cranking amps it has, and whether or not the battery is in good shape. So in order to do that, the first thing you need to do is you need to look up your cold cranking amps for your particular vehicle. And so what I did is I went on ProDemand, looked up my vehicle, and here's the information on ProDemand. So I've got a CK series, and it should have a 600 cold cranking amp battery, and the reserve capacity in minutes is 115 minutes. So I look on this battery here, and I've got 1,000 cranking amps. I've got 800 cold cranking amps. So this is actually a better battery than what the factory recommends. So in order to test a battery, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to load it to half of the cold cranking amps. So this is an 800 cold cranking amp battery, and you want to load it to the battery cranking amps if you've got that specification. If you don't have that specification, what you can do is you can go half of what the manufacturer says you should have. So in this case it would be 300 cold cranking amps. But I'm going to go ahead and test it according to the battery, so that's going to be 400 cold cranking amps, because that's half of my cold cranking amps on the battery. Now to do this, what we're going to need to prepare the battery for it, and so we're going to remove the terminals, and we're going to install these two little guys here, which look like battery terminals, but that'll give me something to hook the machine up to. And so I'm going to do that, and then I'll come back. Okay, I've got my terminals installed. One thing I wanted to mention is when you're doing any kind of battery testing like this, you always want to use these kind of terminals. They're kind of a lead-based alloy that you screw in, and do not use bolts. I've seen a lot of guys, they'll put a bolt in here, and what will happen is the bolt doesn't give you enough surface area to actually get a good test on the battery. These are not very expensive. You can buy them at any parts store. You just go in and ask for some battery test terminals, and there you go. And so we've got those installed. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hook up our machine, which looks like jumper cables. We're going to hook that up to the battery terminals, and then I'll show you how to operate the machine. Okay, I've got my cables hooked up to the car, and you see I've got 12.3 volts, and I've got, right now it just shows 5 amps. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this knob right here, which is the carbon pile, and I'm going to load that up to where the amps will say 400 amps, because this is a 800 cold cranking amp battery, and I want to test the battery to half of its cold cranking amps. And now I want to stress that you don't want to leave the carbon pile on very long at all, and you should have the battery disconnected from the vehicle before you do this. One thing I failed to mention is you have to put the amp clamp on the cables that you hooked up to the battery, and when you use this amp clamp you need to turn it on so that it says I'm going to be measuring 400 amps, so I want to put it over here on the 1000 amp scale. So turn it on, make sure you got a green light. You can zero it, and that makes sure that your machine is zeroed out there as well, so you're getting an accurate reading. And then we can clamp it onto the battery terminal, or the cables that we have hooked up to the battery. So right there. So come back to the machine, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to crank the carbon pile up until this reads 400, just long enough that I can read the voltage. I don't want to leave it up at 400 very long, and it is spring loaded, so it wants to come back on you. So there's 400 right about there, and it's 9 volts. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that this doesn't drop below the specified voltage, and on this one here I believe it's 9 volts or 7 volts. I'd have to look it up. But this is a 9 volts, so it's going to be a good battery. So make sure that you don't leave that carbon pile on there. If this part right here gets really hot, you've left it on too long, and you'll burn up this machine, and you can also damage your battery as well by doing that. So, and that's doing a load test on the battery.